The last ship left at dawn. Dale Rourke watched it go from the top of a broken hill. No dramatic words. No final salute. Just a silver shape rising through smoke until it disappeared into the gray sky above Ura 9. Then nothing. Only wind, and the distant sound of something still burning. He stood there for a while. Long enough for the wind to carry ash across his boots. The Galactic Union had called it. Total loss. Colony Ura 9, a mid-tier agricultural settlement on the Outer Rim, had taken 3 weeks of orbital bombardment during the Vreth Separatist War. The enemy was gone now, pushed back beyond the Third Belt, but so was everything else. The processing plants were craters. The grain towers had collapsed. The residential blocks were rubble and exposed wire. The Union's assessment team had spent exactly 4 hours on the ground before filing their report. Unsalvageable. Recommend full withdrawal. No strategic value in rebuilding at this time. Dale had read the report over the shoulder of the assessment officer. He had not argued. There was no point arguing with a man who was already mentally on the ship home. But Dale had not gotten on the ship. Not because he was brave. Not because he had some great plan. He had stayed because he had stood in that exact spot 6 years ago when the colony was still being built, and he had watched the first water line get connected to the first hab block, and he had felt something that he did not have a word for at the time, but understood now as belonging. He belonged here. The rubble belonged to him. The ash belonged to him. Even the silence belonged to him. He turned away from the sky and walked back down the hill. His equipment was stored in a hardened supply bunker on the colony's eastern edge, one of the few structures that had survived the bombardment because it was built into the rock face and the enemy had not considered it worth targeting. He had a damaged loader mech, functional but slow, with a cracked left arm assembly that he had already patched twice with scrap metal and wire. He had 3 crates of mixed supplies, ration packs, a basic med kit, 2 spare power cells, a water filter unit, and a collection of hand tools. He had a personal comm unit with no working relay to connect to. And he had a notebook. He sat down outside the bunker, opened the notebook to the first page, and wrote 2 words at the top. What exists? Then he started writing. He listed everything he had seen during the 4 days before evacuation when he had quietly walked the ruins while everyone else was packing. Intact underground water pipes along the north corridor. A greenhouse dome, cracked but standing, on the colony's west side. 40 meters of structural wall still upright in the old community hall. A working power junction buried under debris near the central square. Solar array panels, several of them unbroken, lying flat in the dirt where the mounting frames had collapsed. The Union had looked at Ura 9 and seen destruction. Dale looked at his list and saw a construction site. He spent the rest of that first day not building anything. He just moved. He walked the ruins in a grid pattern, the way he used to survey new build sites before the war, and he took notes. He measured distances with his eye and wrote them down. He tested walls with his hand to feel which ones still had solid footing. He pulled back loose debris with the loader mech and photographed what was underneath. By the time the light dropped, he had filled 11 pages. That night, he ate a ration pack and drank filtered water and sat by the bunker entrance listening to the wind move through broken structures. The colony made sounds at night, creaks and groans, metal cooling, something shifting in a distant pile. Another person might have found it unsettling. Dale found it familiar. The colony was still here. It was just wounded. He made one more note before sleeping. Start with one building. Not the biggest. Not the most important. One building, for walls, a roof that holds. Everything else comes after. He put the notebook down, crossed his arms over his chest, and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind continued. Ash drifted across empty streets. The ruins of Ura 9 lay still under a sky full of cold stars. The Union was already 3 sectors away, filing paperwork. Dale was already planning. Share. On the 3rd day, Dale heard something move inside a wall. He was clearing the old community hall, the one with 40 meters of standing structure he had noted in his survey. It was slow work. The loader mech dragged heavy debris away in pieces while Dale followed behind on foot, checking each section before moving further in. The building had potential. Wide floor space, high ceiling, or what was left of it. Solid enough foundation that he could build up from it without starting over. He was pulling a section of collapsed roof panel away from the inner wall when he heard it. A small sound. Not settling metal. Not the wind. Something with intention behind it. He stopped the mech and stood still. Silence. Then it came again, a short, tight sound, like something trying very hard not to breathe loudly and failing. Dale set down his tools. He walked to the inner wall slowly, not rushing, and crouched in front of a section where two collapsed beams had created a low triangular gap near the base. The gap was dark. He clicked on his handheld light and pointed it in. Two eyes reflected back at him. Very large. Very frightened. Dale did not react. He sat down on the floor, all the way down, cross-legged, light pointed slightly to the side so it was not shining directly at the eyes, and waited. A long minute passed. Then, piece by piece, a small figure uncurled from inside the gap. Collie. Child, based on the size. The species was beetle-like, a smooth, rounded body, for thin limbs, a wide, flat face with those oversized, reflective eyes. This one was filthy, covered in dust and dried mud, and shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Dale pointed the light at his own face so the child could see him clearly. He said nothing. He reached into the side pocket of his work vest and pulled out a ration pack. He peeled it open, took a piece from it himself, and ate it, then held out the rest toward the gap. The child stared at the food for a long time. Then a thin hand reached out and took it. Dale nodded once and stood up. He went back to work. He did not ask the child's name that day. He did not ask where it had come from or how long it had been hiding. He cleared debris, reinforced a section of the south wall, and tested the ceiling structure above the main floor. By mid-afternoon, he had identified the section that would become the first interior room. Small, protected on three sides, workable. When he glanced back toward the wall gap, the child was sitting outside it now, watching him with those huge eyes. Dale pointed at a collection of small bolts and washers he had pulled from the debris and sorted into a pile. He made a carrying gesture. The child looked at the pile, looked at Dale, then stood up and carried the pile to where Dale pointed. That was how it started. By evening, the child had a name, Dreen, offered quietly during what passed for dinner, when Dale had set up a folding surface near the bunker entrance and laid out two ration packs side by side. Dale had said his own name first, pointed at himself. Dale, then pointed at the child and waited. The child had looked at the ground for a moment, then said, very softly, Dreen. Dale repeated it correctly. Dreen nodded. They ate without talking. What Dale had not told Dreen, what he had not told anyone, since there was no one to tell, was that he had noticed someone else 3 days ago. A figure moving in the ruins to the west, staying at distance, never approaching. Vreth, from the shape of it. Bioluminescent markings faint in daylight, more visible at dusk. Moving carefully, intelligently, watching him work with what felt like professional curiosity rather than hostility. He had not approached because he understood something about frightened creatures. They came to you when they were ready, or they didn't come at all. Chasing them only drove them further away. That evening, while Dreen slept curled in the corner of the bunker on a folded thermal sheet, Dale sat outside and wrote in his notebook by the faint glow of his handheld light. He added a new section to his list. Not materials or structures this time. People, he wrote. Unknown count. At least 2 besides self. Possibly more in the ruins. Do not search. Make noise that sounds like progress. Let them find the work. He paused, then added one more line. Make it worth finding. He closed the notebook and looked out at the dark ruins of Uranine. Somewhere in the west, a faint blue-green glow moved between broken walls, stopped, and went still. Dale turned off his light and went inside. Sova made contact on the 9th day. Not with words. She simply appeared at the edge of the work site one morning while Dale was digging out the base of the northern water corridor, and she stood there with her 4 arms folded and her bioluminescent markings completely dark, which Dale had come to understand, in his limited experience with Vreth, meant she was trying to look neutral. He glanced at her. He did not stop digging. He said good morning in Standard, then turned back to the pipe junction he was trying to free from compacted dirt and broken concrete. She stood there for a while. Then she picked up a spare digging tool from the equipment pile, walked into the trench, and started clearing from the other end. They worked side by side for 2 hours without speaking. Her name came out later, over water, filtered water from Dale's unit, poured into 2 cups, offered without ceremony. She took it. She drank. She said her name was Sova. She said she had been a Union medic attached to the evacuation team. She had missed the ship, not by accident. she admitted after a pause, but because she had gone back into the ruins to look for survivors, and the ship had not waited. She had expected to die here. She had spent the first week hiding and the second week watching Dale work and not entirely believing what she was seeing. Dale asked if she had any medical supplies with her. She said yes, a standard field kit and a secondary trauma pack she had pulled from an abandoned med station. Dale nodded and wrote that down in his notebook. Then he showed her what he had found under the North Corridor. The colony's original water reclamation system had been built in 3 layers. The top layer, pumps, distribution heads, above-ground filtration, was completely destroyed. The middle layer, junction nodes and pressure regulators, was 60% gone. But the bottom layer, the deep underground pipe network that ran between structures, was almost entirely intact. The bombardment had not reached it. Rock and compacted earth had protected it like armor. If they could reconnect the underground lines to a working surface intake and route it through even one functioning filtration unit, they would have clean running water for however many people were in the settlement. Not a trickle, real flow. Sova studied his hand-drawn diagram for a long time. She asked 3 precise, technical questions. He answered them. She asked a 4th, and he said he didn't know yet, and they would find out when they opened the East Junction. She made a short sound that he interpreted as grudging agreement and rolled up the diagram. It took 11 days. 11 days of digging, testing, patching, rerouting. The loader mech did the heavy extraction. Sova and Dale did the fine work by hand, reconnecting pipe sections, sealing joints with repair compound from the supply bunker, testing pressure at each stage before moving forward. Dreen helped where he could, carrying parts, holding tools, fetching water for them to drink while they worked. He had stopped shaking by the 4th day. By the 8th day, he was making small observations about the work that were genuinely useful. On the 11th day, Dale opened the surface intake valve, checked the pressure gauge, looked at Sova, and turned on the flow. Water moved through the pipe. They heard it, a deep rushing sound from below, building, traveling through the underground network, rising up through the repaired junction, coming out of the single working tap they had connected to the rebuilt section of the community hall wall. Clean, steady, real. Sova stood at the tap with a cup under it. She watched it fill. She did not move for a long time after it was full. Her markings, usually dark when she was thinking or guarded, had gone a soft pale blue, the only time Dale had seen them light up since she arrived. She said, quietly, that on her homeworld when a water line failed it stayed failed. You moved. You found somewhere else. Her people did not repair. They relocated. It was practical. It was efficient. It was what you did. Dale said he understood. She looked at him. She said, then why don't you do that? He thought about it for a moment. Not the answer. He knew the answer. He was thinking about how to say it simply. He said, because there is nowhere else that is mine. Sova looked back at the tap, at the water still running into the cup she had forgotten she was holding. She did not say anything after that, but her markings stayed blue for the rest of the evening. And at dinner, ration packs again, at the folding table near the bunker, the 3 of them eating together as they had every night that week. She sat a little less like someone waiting to leave. Dale wrote 1 line in his notebook before sleeping. Water is running. The hard part is over. He paused, then crossed it out and wrote beneath it. The hard part is next. They found the others the way Dale had expected, not by searching, but by being found. The water changed things. Word did not travel on Ura 9 because there were no working comms and no roads left worth walking, but sound traveled. The pump running. The mech working. Lights at night where there had been no lights. Small signals that said, something is happening here. Come and see. The first 2 came together, a pair of Vreth males, older, former colony maintenance workers who had hidden in the deep storage tunnels under the agricultural district when the bombardment started and simply never left. They were thin and very quiet, and they looked at Dale with the particular expression of beings who had stopped expecting good things and were not yet sure if they should start again. Dale showed them the water tap. He showed them the rebuilt room inside the community hall, 4 walls, a solid roof section, a floor cleared and swept clean. He showed them his notebook and the list of what was still to be done. He did not give a speech. He pointed at the list and said, some of this we cannot do with 3 people. He left it there. They came back the next morning with tools. A human woman named Ren arrived 4 days later, on her own, walking in from the eastern ruins with a pack over one shoulder and a field medic bag in her hand. She had survived the bombardment in a collapsed clinic, treated her own injuries in the dark, and spent 3 weeks scavenging medical supplies from ruined stations before the lights and the sound of the pump reached her. She shook Dale's hand, looked around the settlement, looked at Sova, and said, "I heard there was a medic here. I'd like to talk about what we have between us." Sova and Ren spent the next 2 hours inventorying medical supplies in the corner of the hall while Dale worked outside. When they emerged, they had a joint list, a plan for a proper medical station, and what looked from the outside like the beginning of a working relationship. 3 more came over the following week. 2 humans and 1 collie adult who turned out to be Dreen's older cousin, who had been searching the ruins for the boy since the evacuation and had nearly given up. When she saw Dreen running across the cleared square toward her, she sat down on the ground right where she stood and did not move for several minutes. Dale looked away and kept working. 8 survivors in total, including himself. 5 humans, 3 aliens. Different species, different backgrounds, different reasons for being left behind or choosing to stay. Not a community yet. Not even close. Just 8 people sharing space and water, and the basic understanding that survival was easier together than apart. Dale knew that survival was not enough. He had seen it in his own early days. The way people doing hard work in silence stayed separate even while standing next to each other. They helped. They cooperated. But they went back to their own corners at night and stared at the walls. No roots went down in that kind of arrangement. You could keep people alive that way indefinitely and still lose them. Not to death. To drift. So on the 22nd day, Dale cooked. Not ration packs. He had been quietly allocating 2 crates of preserved colony food stock he had found buried in the agricultural storage tunnels. Things the maintenance workers had shown him, and he had been saving them for this. He cooked an actual meal on a functioning heat unit he had repaired from salvage parts. Protein, grain, something that was almost a vegetable. Nothing elegant, but hot, and real, and made with intention. He built a table out of hull plating, long, flat, wide enough for 8. He set out cups. He put the food in the center. Then he went and told each person, one by one, that dinner was ready. No one said much during the meal. They were still strangers in some ways. But they sat at the same table, and they passed food to each other, and they ate warm food for the first time in weeks, and something in the room was different by the end of it that had not been different at the start. Dreen fell asleep at the table, which made one of the older Vreth workers make a low sound that Sova quietly translated for Dale as what his species used instead of laughing. Dale put a blanket over the child and cleared the dishes. Ren stopped him on the way back and said, "Do that again tomorrow." Dale said he intended to. She nodded and went to help with the dishes. Dale looked at the table, at the empty cups and the cleared plates and the blanket-covered child, and allowed himself, for the first time since the fleet had left, to feel something other than the next task. It was brief, but it was there. He went to his notebook that night and drew a line under the first section. Above the line was what existed when he arrived. Below the line, he began a new heading. What we are building share. 6 months after the fleet left, Ura 9 had a name. Rourke's Folly. Ren had said it first, half joking, one evening when the 3rd greenhouse panel had cracked during installation, and Dale had quietly climbed back up to fix it without a word of complaint. She had laughed when she said it, and so had the others, and Dale had shrugged and said, "Fine by me." The name stuck. Someone scratched it on a piece of flat metal and nailed it to the community hall door. Later someone else, without saying anything to anyone, added the word settlement underneath. No one took it down. The settlement was not a city. It was not even a proper colony yet, but it was real in every way that mattered. The community hall had been fully rebuilt, roof sealed, walls reinforced, interior divided into a main gathering space, and 3 side rooms. The largest side room was the medical station that Ren and Sova ran together. It had sorted inventory, clean equipment, a cot for patients, and a handwritten chart on the wall listing which supplies were low and what could be substituted from local salvage. The second room had become storage for food and tools. The third room had become, by collective decision and without much discussion, the school. Dreen had started it. The child had a restless, precise mind and had spent the early weeks of the settlement learning everything he could from every adult around him. Standard from Dale, Vreth technical terms from Sova, medical vocabulary from Ren. At some point, he had started teaching the two youngest survivors, children who had emerged from hiding in the ruins 2 months in, found by one of the maintenance workers during a clearing run, the alphabet in 4 languages simultaneously, sitting on the floor with scavenged chalk and a flat panel of dark material as a board. Dreen's cousin had looked at this arrangement and said nothing for a full day. Then she had sat down beside him and started helping. The school had 4 students now, 1 part-time teacher who was 10 years old, and 1 full-time teacher who was 23 and took the responsibility with absolute seriousness. Outside, the settlement had a garden. The greenhouse dome on the west side had been fully repaired. Dale and the 2 maintenance workers had spent 2 weeks on the roof in rotation, sealing every crack, replacing 3 panels with salvage material, testing the internal atmosphere control. Inside, the first crops had been planted in salvaged growth medium and recycled soil. They were not ready yet, but they were growing. Every person in the settlement had walked through the dome at least once just to look at the green. The power grid, 4 solar array sections, rewired and remounted, ran a low but steady current through the main structures. Lights at night, heat when the temperature dropped, power for the water pump that ran clean water to 3 tap points across the settlement. And every evening, dinner. It had become fixed now, not by rule or announcement, but by the simple gravity of a good thing repeated. Someone cooked. Everyone ate. The table Dale had made from hull plating had been extended twice. There was always noise at that table. Argument, sometimes. Quiet, sometimes. Dreen making observations that were too precise for a child his age. Ren telling stories about terrible decisions she had made in emergency medicine that somehow came out funny. The old maintenance workers eating with the slow, deliberate enjoyment of people who had been hungry for a long time and had not forgotten it. Dale did not talk much at dinner. He listened. He watched. He felt the shape of the thing that had been built and understood that it was no longer just his. It belonged to all of them. That was the point. On the 178th day since the fleet left, a Union long-range scout drone passed over Ura 9 at high altitude, running its standard survey sweep of abandoned sites. It was a routine pass. Automated. The data would compile and transmit back to Fleet Command without anyone reviewing it in real time. The drone's imaging array captured the following: a cleared and structured settlement site, multiple intact buildings, active solar power grid, functioning greenhouse dome, evidence of agriculture, lights, movement, a painted landing zone in the open square, white lines, precise, deliberate, and a sign above the main entrance to the community hall, visible from altitude. Ura 9, population growing. The data packet traveled across 3 sectors, routing through 2 relay stations, and arrived in the queue of Fleet Command's Survey Analytics Office at 0340 hours. It was flagged automatically by the settlement detection algorithm and moved to the priority review folder, where it sat until morning, where Admiral Orith, arriving at his desk at 0600 hours with the day's briefings, found it waiting. He opened the file. He looked at the images. He read the site assessment the algorithm had generated: active habitation, multi-species occupancy, infrastructure level, moderate, threat level, none. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the images for a very long time. Then he called for a navigator and told them to plot a course for Ura 9. Share. The fleet arrived on a clear morning. 3 ships, a command vessel and 2 escorts, came down through the atmosphere in tight formation and held at low altitude above the ruins that surrounded the settlement. From the ground, their hulls caught the morning light and turned it silver. The whole settlement saw them. Ren stepped out of the medical station with a cloth in her hands and looked up. Dreen's cousin put both sets of arms around the children. The 2 maintenance workers stood in the doorway of the hall and said nothing. Sova walked to the edge of the cleared square and stood there with her markings cycling slowly through blue and gold, colors that Dale, by now, knew meant she was working through something complicated. Dale came out of the greenhouse with dirt on his hands. He had been checking the first crop of the season. The grain was nearly ready. He had been calculating the harvest in his head, thinking about storage capacity, thinking about the next round of planting. He had not been thinking about the Union at all. He wiped his hands on his work vest, looked up at the 3 ships, and walked to the center of the painted landing zone. The command vessel descended slowly and set down in the square with the careful precision of a crew that had noticed the painted lines and chose to respect them. The landing ramp opened. Admiral Orth came down alone. No security detail, no formal escort. That, Dale noted, was a deliberate choice. Orth was a large-breathed male, older, with the kind of bearing that came from decades of command rather than performance. His markings were deep and settled. He stopped at the base of the ramp and looked across the square at the settlement, at the hall with its sign, the greenhouse dome catching light in the west, the lights running along the building fronts, the water tap on the corner post dripping steadily into a catch basin. He looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he walked across the square to where Dale was standing. He said, "We declared this site a total loss." Dale said, "I know." Orth looked at him carefully. He said, "I read the assessment report. I signed it. There was nothing here worth the cost of rebuilding. That was the correct determination based on everything we had." Dale nodded. He said, "You were looking at what was destroyed. I was looking at what wasn't." Orth was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, plainly, "How?" It was not a question about engineering or logistics. Dale understood that. He thought about how to answer it the same way he had thought about answering Sova's question months ago, looking for the simple true version rather than the complicated right one. He said, "You decide it's yours and you don't stop." Orth looked at him. He said nothing. Dale said, "Would you like to see it?" They walked through the settlement together. Dale did not narrate. He let Orth look. The Admiral moved through the spaces quietly, pausing at the greenhouse to study the rows of growing crops, pausing at the medical station doorway, where Rin gave him a short nod without stopping what she was doing, pausing longest in the schoolroom, where 4 children were sitting in a rough semicircle around Dreen, who was explaining something on the board with the confident energy of someone who had completely forgotten to be intimidated by the presence of a Union Admiral 3 meters away. Orth watched the child teach for almost a full minute. Then he turned and walked back out with Dale. In the square, he stopped and looked at the sign above the hall entrance. Ura 9, population growing. He read it twice. He said, "I came here expecting to retrieve remains and close the site file." Dale said, "I know." Orth said, "I need to send a new report." He went back to his ship. He was inside for 40 minutes. When he came back down the ramp, he was carrying a printed document, a formal Union administrative form, the kind that required command-level authorization and a physical signature to take effect. He held it out to Dale. It was a reclassification order. Ura 9, formerly listed as colony site, abandoned, total loss, was reclassified as independent settlement, active. Administrative jurisdiction, self-governing. Union support status, eligible. Abandonment order, reversed. At the bottom, Orth's signature. Dale looked at the document. He looked at Orth. He said, "Thank you." Orth said, "I don't know if thank you is correct. I think we owe you something larger than that, and I am not yet sure how to calculate it." Dale folded the document and put it in his vest pocket. He said, "Come back in a year. Bring engineers if you have any to spare. We'll have a second greenhouse ready by then, and the East Corridor needs a proper water junction." Orth looked at him with an expression that Dale had seen before, the expression of someone who had a category for every situation they had encountered in their career and had just run out of categories. He said he would come back. The fleet lifted at midday. The settlement watched the ships rise and disappear into the sky. Then Rin said lunch was ready, and everyone went inside. Dale sat at the far end of the table with the reclassification document in front of him and a cup of water in his hand. Around him, the settlement ate and talked and passed food across the table. Dreen explained something to the children. Sova argued gently with one of the maintenance workers about the best angle for the next solar panel mount. Ren told a story that made someone choke on their food laughing. Dale drank his water. He picked up the document, folded it once more, and set it to the side. There was a harvest coming. There was a second greenhouse to plan. There was a reclassification to file and a Union support request to draft and an East Corridor water junction to dig. He finished his lunch and went back to work. Share.